Welcome back to the Roadside Rescue YouTube channel. I'm Ernest, and today, this morning, it's cold. It's probably the first really cold day of the year. You can see the snow up on the mountains there. There was snow all over the ground here yesterday, but it was just warm enough, like 38 degrees or something, I think was the high, that it just melted yesterday. But it's cold today. It's like, I think the high is about 33 or something like that. So this is the first real cold day. I can even see my breath. Which again, this is Utah, so it's a little different. It's really dry, and as long as there's not like wind, there's no moisture, so you can stay relatively warm. If the sun's out, it would almost feel probably like 60 back home in Tennessee, you know, even being 30 something a day. The sun's not out though. It's overcast, which is rare. But we've got, so you guys are gonna like this video. Let me just go pick up some parts real quick, and I'll explain what's going on when we get there, because a lot of people are probably interested in seeing this. So here we go. All right, so here we are with everybody's most favorite recent video. A lot of people in the comments down below talking about this one. And let me hop up in the truck here and explain a little bit. So no matter how much I think I'm covering all the information on a vehicle, there always tends to be something that I leave out. And on this recent Montero that I worked on, apparently there was quite a bit of information that I left out that made the video, I guess, not make a whole lot of sense. And there's a lot of comments down below, and I try and stay out of like drama and just like people kind of, you know, comment what they want. And I don't want to argue with people in the comments, especially since it's just like I'm arguing with one person. Not everybody's going to see it. So I figured I'd just come back and do another video, since that was pretty much the plan regardless. And to keep it brief, this Montero here is owned by a customer of mine that I've worked on his vehicles quite a few times, and just kind of turned into a good friend out here. He got this Montero from his brother, and his brother had the same issue going on for a couple years and never really drove it. This guy doesn't really need it ASAP. He may try and trade it for another vehicle here soon, and so it wasn't urgent. It wasn't one of those jobs where I had to come out and fix it right off the bat, you know, first time deal, and get everything diagnosed. Now the story gets kind of tricky because he took it to a dealership and had it diagnosed, paid them for the diagnosis, where they told him that it was a bad fuel pump. They also said other things, like they looked at the timing belt and needed a new timing belt and spark plugs. And so when I came out here, I looked at the timing belt and I looked at the crankshaft position sensor, which is what everybody was saying, hey, you need to look at that crankshaft position sensor. That's where all that drama came from. And I'll get a little bit into that in just a second. I'm gonna try and keep this brief. And so I looked at the timing belt and it looked great. It looked pretty new. And that fuel pump also sounded just fine, and it was dying, you know, like on a switch. It was kind of just shutting right off. And this guy could get it to die. So when I thought, well, it sounds like it may be kind of, you know, like electronically related. And everybody's like, you didn't need to replace these. So I probably didn't need to replace the terminals, but rather than clean them, they're so cheap, I buy them in bulk, that I just replaced the terminals for them because they were kind of stretched out. And so this was something, you know, that, you know, the terminals, I just gave them new terminals to keep it nice and clean, and, you know, just have nice new terminals in there. So that's that. But I thought maybe the issue was the ground wire going to the engine, because I couldn't get it to die like he could get it to die. Apparently this guy knows how to make it die. And so when I did that and it was running fine, he hadn't driven it for a few weeks because, again, he doesn't need it, but he may try and trade it. So he got it to die. So we figured, okay, it wasn't that ground wire, because I had understood that it was after he would turn it off when it was warm, it wouldn't start back up, and that's pretty common for a ground wire. But this was killing itself kind of on a switch is what we ended up determining. And so it had a code for the crankshaft position sensor, and I'm like, it just does not sound like a fuel pump. And so we called that dealership. He called the dealership. I called the dealership, he called the dealership again a couple of times, and these guys were just, and so I've made some videos before about people misdiagnosing vehicles, and I think every time it's been a dealership. And so that's what everybody says, you know, take it to the dealership, and that's what I've been telling all my customers forever. But every time I've had somebody just kind of give them that general diagnosis, the parts cannon is what people like to call it, it's been a dealership that's done that. And I called these guys and I said, you know, this fuel pump looks perfectly fine, it has good pressure, and it doesn't seem like a fuel pump problem. Well, they got real irritated on the phone, and I understand. I mean, I wasn't trying to argue with them, but they just got real irritated and started hanging up on us. So we had to call back a few times, and I'm like, look, I just want you to guarantee your diagnosis. I want you to tell me that if I replace the fuel pump and it's not that, you know, that you'll at least reimburse this guy his diagnosis fee, or that you'll admit that you didn't do the diagnosis, so I have somewhere to start, because I don't want to. How's it going? You're good. So I was telling them I don't want to replace the fuel pump because I don't trust your diagnosis. And that's what got them real irritated. They said, no, we do our diagnosis correctly, everything. So what did we do? This guy decides, okay, I paid him for the diagnosis and they're going to stand by it. So we replaced the fuel pump, and guess what? It wasn't the fuel pump, which I told him I didn't think it was, but that was his decision. He said, well, let's replace the fuel pump. If it's not, at least we've got a new fuel pump. But it was just astounding to me that they would get so irate over this fuel pump. And I could tell that they didn't really diagnose anything. They hadn't pulled any spark plugs. They hadn't pulled that cover on the timing belt because it looked brand new or really new. And anyway, so here we are, and it's got the codes for crankshaft position sensor and camshaft position sensor. We're going to replace both since they kind of work together there as a team, and that's the deal. That's kind of what I thought it was the whole time, and I guess I left some information out in that first video when I just fixed up the batteries here, the terminals. Again, just a little bit of information I left out, so I apologize for that. Just a funny story, just kind of how in the past, this year, the few times that I've just had some really bad diagnosis done was from dealerships. My brother-in-law bought a truck, and he had a coolant temperature sensor that was bad, so he replaced his coolant temperature sensor, and it didn't, I mean, the gauge wasn't working, and so he replaced it, and he took it to the dealership because it still didn't fix it, and they said, nope, it's that sensor. And he said, well, maybe I got a bad sensor. So he paid him for that diagnosis. He went and put a new sensor, and it still didn't work, put another new sensor, and it still didn't work. And at this point, the dealership says, we're not giving you your money back because you didn't have it fixed by us. And so obviously they didn't diagnose anything as well. That was 3 sensors. There's no way that 3 in a row are bad. And his gauge didn't work. It was obviously something else. And so yeah, I don't want to like talk bad about dealerships, but I've just had some bad experiences this year with them, and this was one of them. And so I feel bad for the guy because we ended up replacing his fuel pump. I didn't even make a video about it. And that dealership, you know, after getting mad and promising that that's what the deal was, you know, it wasn't the fuel pump. It was obviously this crankshaft position sensor. We'll see. I say obviously, we haven't replaced it yet. That's what we're here to do today. I've got the crankshaft position sensor, the camshaft position sensor, and we're going to get these replaced. So this should be a fun little job. Sorry for the little rant there. Again, I'm not trying to rail on the dealership, just kind of, you know, telling you about this story, what happened. And again, in that last video, a lot of people, there was a bit of miscommunication about what was going on in that job. So here we are, we'll do those sensors, and we'll start digging into it. All right, so the sensor plugs in up here. It runs through the timing belt area, just behind this timing belt cover, down to the crankshaft. Behind the harmonic balancer. So I'm gonna have to pull the balancer. I'm gonna have to pull a couple of things on the front of the engine here. I don't know if I'll have to pull everything. And in fact, I'm hoping I don't. But I think just to clear up space, make everything easier, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the radiator. So I'm gonna get this draining. I'll pull my clean coolant jug out. I have one for coolant that I don't recycle. I have one for coolant that I do recycle. And this coolant's pretty new. So I'm gonna recycle the coolant. In this system, we'll drain it out, and we'll remove this radiator. So that's where we're going to get started here. So this is really the first cold day of the year that I'm out working, and sometimes in the winter, like I said, it's so dry and the sun's so warm out here because we're at elevation as well. I think has something to do with it, that sometimes even in the winter it's not that cold. Today's cold. There's snow on the vehicle here. Like I said, there's snow on the ground, and there's snow up all on the mountain still from yesterday. Not a ton, but that's just a little idea of how cold it is. And that's the biggest question I've been getting all summer, I think, or the most frequently asked question, not frequently, but consistently asked, I guess, is what do I do when it's cold outside? The answer's always been be cold. I always forget about the little things, just the tips of your fingers being so numb and hurting so bad when you try and touch things. And the one thing I forgot about that I just remembered today, because there was a bit of snow, is the snow on the front of the vehicle. It's terrible. So you're always leaning up against it. If you can't get it all cleaned up, your pants and your stomach get wet. And if you try and sweep it off, it always ends up right here. So then the floor gets soaked, and if it's cold enough, it just gets packed in right there. So the creeper won't ever slide under it. Sliding under it's a hassle because you got to get over that bump of snow. So that by far is the most annoying thing about winter, is that the snow on the hood right here, leaning up against it and getting wet. I could probably get like a little tarp or something to put over it. I may end up doing that this year. But I always try and sweep it off. Regardless, there's always just some moisture left, and you lean against it and you get wet, and the tips of your fingers just hurt. So my gloves are different. I don't wear those rubber gloves when it's cold. And yeah, that's just a couple of things that were occurring to me as I get started here today. All right, there we go. It's going to be a few minutes before this drains, so I'm going to start removing that top hose as soon as it gets opened, and a few other things up here, but that's draining out. We got that petcock open. And the crankshaft position sensor, the camshaft, sorry, is right here. So I can get to that if it was just the camshaft sensor, but it's most likely the crank. And again, we're just replacing both. I spoke to a separate dealership whenever we were talking about this, between a couple of dealerships, one that was a lot more friendly, and they said the best thing to do would just be replace both if it had both codes coming up. So that's the plan after we talked to the owner of this vehicle about that, and he wants to get both those replaced. Again, it would probably be fine with just the crankshaft, but we're going to do camshaft as well. And we've just got to remove this cover, I think, to get to the camshaft, get stuff loose up here, and I think we may be good leaving like the fan and everything on. If we need to take it off, we will. And you know, sometimes the manual tells you need to take everything off and you really don't, so we'll see how that goes. Everybody hates these kinds of hose clamps. I kind of like them, but this is where I want to be careful. This is obviously the original radiator. This plastic gets very brittle after all those heat cycles and all those years, so looks like this one's going to come off easy, but you want to be careful, not, especially when you use a different style hose clamp, the kind you have to twist. You can easily twist them too tight and break plastic here. Yeah, you can see just how brittle that is. If I just wipe my finger across that thin edge, it just starts taking it away. I'll turn this hose up here just to make it easier. Let's go ahead and do this. Gotta get this out of the way by turning it. And I'll probably need a screwdriver to get under that. All right, so I just get that hose twisted up out of the way. That way I can get this radiator loose and out of there. It should be pretty simple. Oh, these are actually my favorite kind of clips, the ones you can undo with your fingers. All right, this radiator is ready to come out as long as there's no bolts holding it in the bottom for some reason. Oh, but there may be some transmission lines since it's an automatic. So there is something holding it in. Let's get those transmission lines clamped off and taken out of there as well. All right, we got both those transmission lines taken off. This radiator should slide out easy. Try not to bend anything. Any of these little fins, we'll clean it up a bit. Maybe not on the front of the car where I'm about to lean against. But that's out. That'll give us a lot more room to get down to that harmonic balancer down there. Get that taken out. And yeah, just a little more to go. Maybe take this fan off, this clutch off, just to be able to see down there as well. It should be pretty simple since it's just bolted right onto that pulley there for that water pump. And it doesn't have to come off like a typical fan clutch. Well, I don't know which one would be easier, but pretty simple. Yeah, so you can take these off with 2 wrenches or just leave the belts on so that it doesn't spin, and then you can take it off with just 1 wrench. 4 little bolts. You can also spin it a little so you can get to it. And with a little bit of luck, this pulley will stay on. If it comes off, then we'll just loosen that belt up, recenter everything before we put it all down, and then tighten up that belt last. All right, now that fan's off, this pulley's staying in place. I think it's probably a 2-part pulley, which is helping since this one is in the back going around the alternator and whatnot down there. I'm not sure what's going on here. Is that the main bolt on that crankshaft? Looks like it is. I don't know why it's sticking out so far. I mean, we'll see when we pull it out, but I'm gonna have to take these belts off anyways. These two, because I'm gonna need to take that balancer off, so we'll take these 2 belts off. I may have to take this whole bracket off as well, and rather than fight with it, I'll determine that real quick, and then before I try and figure out a sneaky way around that and fight with it, I'll just go ahead and zip it off real quick. I don't want to have to deal with the headache of trying to figure out, you know, manufacture my own way to get behind all that. So we'll see. I'm gonna start, I'll just take these belts off, and yeah, we'll see what happens underneath there. A very commonly asked question is how I get this angle. The GoPro is just clipped to the hood up here, so. It's a good time to check all the bearings on those. Make sure stuff doesn't need replaced. And we'll get that harmonic balancer out of there. See if I can fit my impact in here. I wish I had that 90-degree angle impact for this one. We'll see. I'll figure something out, how to get that out. All right, so that breaker bar up against the frame rail and the starter trick worked well on that, if you could tell what I was doing. Just want to make sure it's not on something that's flexible or can break. So I put it up against the frame, and then you'll make sure you have it going in the right direction. The motor's going to spin clockwise, so not on this one or else it'll come swinging down and break something. And you know, I want to get a 90-degree impact now that I think about it for sure, but that's what I have today. And yeah, crank over that starter and it pops that bolt loose. So okay, so that's what's going on with that bolt. It's just got this, you know, spacer right there. Yeah, so this balancer wasn't pressed on. I just took that thing on there and it popped it loose. So really all I would have had to have done is just grab it and wiggle it off. All right, well, it looks like that cover, the lower part of the cover runs all the way up behind this. So I'll go ahead and pop this out real quick. It's just a few more bolts now. And I'm gonna disconnect the battery since I'm gonna start getting into electrical stuff. And since I'm gonna pull that starter out, I'm gonna leave the starter in the bracket. My goal is to just pull the bracket forward, let it sit right here so I can reach behind it and get everything else done. So we'll see how that works out. I'll let you know. Obviously you'll see if that has to change. Now for brackets like this, the best way to keep these bolts organized in my opinion is to leave them together. So just leave these bolts in this hole and we'll just leave that bracket all together. I do have a couple of organizers. Bolster makes some good ones like that if you're going to take stuff apart and separate them, but if you're not going to separate them, if you're just doing a quick job, that's the easiest way to keep everything in its correct place in my opinion. Here's another piece of information I left out at the beginning. The reason we didn't do that crankshaft position sensor right away before testing it, and he drove it a couple of weeks, is because of all the amount of work that it takes to get down to it. So all right, so there we go. I've got that pulled out now. And well, I don't know. Now that I look at it, yeah, I guess I had to do that. Maybe even just to get that sensor out in the first place. So I'm not upset about having to remove all this. Yeah, I mean, like this one over here, I couldn't see this bolt for that lower cover and then that upper cover. But again, I just pulled the bracket out of the way. The alternator's still on it. And yeah, I mean, we're right here, so we'll get that undone. And the sensor, I'll show you where it's at. It's right there, but it runs all the way up through and plugs in up here. So that was a bit of work to get to. All right, that's as exposed as everything's gonna get. It's a good time to look around for leaks. Here's the crankshaft position sensor, and it runs this wire up through here, up, all the way to here. So that's a little bit crazy to get all the way down there. I don't know why, you know, they couldn't run something around the side and figure out something down below like most vehicles do. But every vehicle seems to have a few weird quirks like that, and apparently that was this one's. No big deal. We're down here now. We'll get that replaced. And the camshaft position sensor, similar sensor. If you can see it, it's tucked around right here. All right, time to take these sensors out. So the battery's unplugged. Again, you want to make sure you do that before you remove sensors and stuff. It's that sensor. Interesting routing for it. almost officially out. Let's see here. Just pull it through this way. All right, there it is, officially out. And we'll get the new one. Okay, we'll make sure this wire gets tucked in how it's supposed to so it doesn't break on anything in there, get rubbed and broken. Down in there. See, I'll need my fingers to get on that tab down there. Just to make sure it gets in there right. Nice. Okay. Got a little bit better feel without these gloves on, obviously. Just double checking everything before I tighten it down. Last thing you want to do is forget something and have to go all the way back down there to fix it. So, we'll do that camshaft position sensor as well. That is this one. All right, there's the camshaft position sensor, very similar, nice and brittle. Just loosening that little bolt there broke off this plastic. You can see it's kind of warped as well. So that's good to replace that. And it has been flurrying a little bit for like the past 30 minutes. So that's cool. All right, that sensor's in place. I mean, we've technically already been going back together, but this is the point where like everything starts going back together because it's not what I was replacing. So in my head now, we're officially going back together. Okay, so we've just got to put this little sensor, has a loop right there for that. We've got to make sure it goes in to keep that away from the timing belt. And as soon as that's in, everything's good on these sensors. And that's on. All right, I need to find that camshaft position sensor, the old one, because it has this little bracket like this for the bolt to go through, but I cannot figure out where I put that sensor down at. I think the thing with the old parts is I don't pay as much attention to them because they don't have to go back in. But I've been looking up here for a minute trying to figure out where I tossed it. Here's the crankshaft sensor that I got the other one off of, but don't remember where I put that camshaft one, so I'm gonna look around for a minute for that wire. All right, here it is. I tossed it at my trash bucket, but I guess I missed and it flew over the back side of it, so that's where it was. All right, so I'll put this in like that. that's it. We'll put this bracket on, and then there was this bracket here. We got to ground that. And everything's good to go back together up here. Starting to get a pretty cold breeze coming off that mountain, I think, where it's snowing. It's getting a little chilly even with my hat on here. My ears are starting to get a little cold. Alright, let's plug these new sensors in. Then get that bottom cover on. Get the alternator put back into place with its bracket, and then I'll plug the electricity back in while I continue putting everything together here. Yeah, my fingers are starting to get cold too, so it's a good thing we're going back together now. Alright, that front cover's back on. Let's put the accessories back on. I'll just do a time lapse of this, I think. Alright. All right, there she is, all back together. We've got it topped off with coolant. Everything's tightened down, double checked, nothing missing. If this is a job well done, we're gonna have the guy come out here and test it since he knows how to kill it. I think he's gonna drive around the neighborhood for a few minutes and do his thing. And if it doesn't die, then extra job well done. But we got those replaced. That should be the issue. And we'll see how it goes. All right, so it's running good. There you have it. Yeah, I guess just a little bit of information I left out in that last video was always the plan to investigate a little bit further if needed, but just a good starting point. But anyways, it's running good now. He's been test driving it for a bit, and he knows how to kill it and didn't get it to die. So it's a job well done. Thanks for watching this Roadside Rescue YouTube channel. I'm Ernest. We'll see you on the next episode.